In this lecture, we will continue our discussion of research designs used in education. ESSA's tiers outline the research designs and rank them by strength. Let's look at the research designs discussed in ESSA. Remember, a research design is a plan for answering research questions, testing hypotheses. In educational research, we have both quantitative and qualitative research. As you saw from the ESSA tiers, only quantitative research is considered when making educational decisions. Research designs can be thought of in terms of a hierarchy. As Stanovich and Stanovich explain, there's a place for all types of research designs, but in terms of strength and confidence in the results and generalizability of the effects to the populations we work with, all research designs are not equal. I will explain each of these further in the next slides. Experimental research is at the top of the hierarchy, Tier 1 for ESSA, because this is the research design that has the strongest design that can most clearly tell us if what we found in the research can be generalized to other populations. Below that is quasi-experimental designs. They are slightly weaker as they don't have the same amount of control, and then correlational designs. All of these designs are the designs that are talked about in the ESSA tiers, and also these are the designs used in the studies that were included in the National Reading Panel report. Remember, they did not consider qualitative research or case studies, and this was because these studies are not set up to enable us to understand clear generalizability of effects. In our work in reading science, we will focus on quantitative research. But let's start by understanding how qualitative research differs and why we focus on quantitative. Qualitative research differs from quantitative research in a number of ways. First of all, in its data collection. Qualitative research often only utilizes informal observations and descriptions, interviews, questionnaires, self-reports. It's not that qualitative research is bad, not at all. It has a place in the research process. We just don't want to stop there. It is helpful in terms of identifying questions that require further scientific research. It can help us in developing a hypothesis for further quantitative research, and it's a great place to begin when unsure of what you need to study or what hypothesis to propose. So it is a great beginning part of the research process. It just cannot be used to generalize the findings to large groups of children. We can't use it to understand what we want to use and do with the children we serve. We are going to review the different quantitative research designs described in ESSA. Overall, quantitative research includes experimental and control groups, identifies a clear hypothesis before beginning a study. It provides detailed descriptions of all subjects, experimental and control groups, uses a rigorous methodology outlined so that research can be replicated and generalized. It examines results with sophisticated statistical analysis, and we want to look at research that's published studies in a peer-reviewed journal. There are 3 broad research designs and many variants within these broad categories that I want to briefly go over. The first is experimental design. This is our gold standard. Experimental design is where you have 2 or more independent groups that are randomly assigned to either an experimental or a control group. So the key in experimental design is random assignment of subjects. When you have random assignment of subjects, you're controlling for a lot of variables within a subject, like background, preferences, cognitive skills, etc. So this demonstrates a high degree of control with random assignment. Statistical analyses are done to understand the group differences using reliable and valid measures. So here's an example. You're testing a new vocabulary program. You have 300 fourth graders. 150 of them are randomly assigned to an experimental group, and 150 are randomly assigned in a control group. This can prove to be difficult in school settings where children are part of classes, and a school is not keen on letting researchers reassign children to instructional groups. When random assignment is not possible, a quasi-experimental design may be used. There are a number of different quasi-experimental designs. Non-random assignment, and that is a design that's just like the experimental design, except there's not random assignment of subjects to a control group or an intervention group or experimental group. Sometimes you'll see this in the fourth grade example where it's 2 fourth grade classrooms and they may randomly assign one of the classrooms to the vocabulary intervention and the other classroom as the control. Some other kinds of quasi-experimental designs are interrupted time series designs and program evaluation. These designs are most common in school settings where, again, random assignment can prove difficult. The next tier is correlational research. Correlational research examines the relationship between 2 or more non-manipulated variables. So, for example, looking at the relationship between height and weight, birth order and years of education, cigarettes smoked per day and the healthcare costs, how close to the front you sit in a classroom and your grades in the class, poverty and reading status. So you're looking at 2 different variables and measuring them and understanding how they relate to each other in groups of children. Correlational research is a general category that is usually discussed in terms of 2 variables, and there are different types of correlational research designs. For example, cross-sectional research, where you're looking at 4th graders, 5th graders, and 6th graders all at the same time, but looking at cross-sections, meaning not the same children across those years, but different groups, but looking at kind of the developmental range. Longitudinal research is looking at the developmental range of the same group of children. So following 4th graders through 5th grade, through 6th grade, through 7th grade, the same group of children followed across time. That would be longitudinal research. And a little hint, in the activity you're about to do, you might see longitudinal research. Other correlational designs are factor analysis, where you're looking at lots of different variables and how they relate, and path analysis, how different variables are predictive of other variables. In correlational research, a correlation coefficient is reported, and this helps you know how big the relationship is. So we look at the correlation coefficients in terms of the range and the size and magnitude. So 0 would be no relationship and 1 would be a perfect relationship. We also look at it in terms of directionality. If it's a positive relationship, that would mean as one variable goes up, the other one also goes up. So as time in class increases, reading achievement increases. Or a negative relationship. As off-task behavior increases, reading achievement decreases. In education, we have a lot of qualitative research that is published in peer-reviewed journals. And so we have to be careful about understanding that in terms of understanding generalizability and effects on children. The National Reading Panel set the criteria that they were only going to look at research that was quantitative so that they could understand generalizability and causation of effects. Initially, they identified 115,000 citations in the literature focusing on children's reading development from preschool through grade 12 within peer-reviewed journals. They found approximately 600 of the 115,000 studies to have rigorous qualities of quantitative research and to be appropriate for use in the panel's meta-analysis and reviews. They did look at some non-peer-reviewed data that they included in an appendix to understand trends and ideas for future research. But I think this slide helps us remember that just because something's published in a peer-reviewed journal doesn't mean it's rigorous research. We really do have to understand research design and what kind of conclusions we can make based on the design that's used. Not all designs are equal.